Colleagues, welcome back to the office, but an office that is unknown to all of you. Welcome to my in-laws office and welcome back to our podcast for today. We're on the road this week down in the beautiful city of Laverne, and we're coming to you live from my in-laws' beautiful guest room. So thank you so much for being here and welcome to our presentation, which is Critical Tips for Avoiding Identity Theft and Data Breaches, Part 3. Now, in this series, we are looking at some of the most important things that we need to know to help keep our organizations safe and secure. The reality is that with respect to data breaches, they're a fact of life now. And for many organizations, unfortunately, it's a growing concern. And it's a risk that's only going to get more important in the coming years. In this series, we've looked at some of the major aspects of identity theft that we need to avoid. We've started to explore, for example, organizational risks with respect to how data breaches can occur and what to be on the lookout for, whether they be phishing, spam messages, potential malware, ransomware, and more. And in today's class, we're going to continue to expand upon that knowledge. And I'm so excited to be able to present to you the findings for the most recent Verizon's Data Breach and Investigations Report, or the DBIR report. The DBIR report, which is published annually by Verizon and over 200 other co-authors from around the world, from Interpol to the Dutch High Crimes Commission and other law enforcement agencies and corporations from around the world, are combined by Verizon annually into this, in my opinion, probably the overall best security report for industry-focused folks. And this report will essentially kind of give us the insight necessary to make good and effective security decisions for our organizations going forward. It identifies what's happened in the last year and what we need to be on the lookout for this year and beyond. So in today's class, we're going to do a deep dive with respect to this particular report, and we're going to look at some of the major aspects that we should be familiar with, including, for example, some of the major threat actors that are out there. For example, what are the nation states doing? What are organized crime doing? What are insiders doing? As well as some of the major motivations of this. Why are people doing what they are doing? Whether it be for financial gain, espionage, or more. In terms of the actual report itself, we're going to look at this in two pieces. Today, I really kind of want to focus on the trends affecting North America and the stuff that North American organizations need to be concerned with for keeping their organizational data safe and secure. And then I also want to dive into, with respect to some specific industries, including small and medium business, the finance industry, information, and professionals, as I think that's probably a majority of the people watching today and are listening. What are the things that a CPA firm or an insurance office or more should be concerned with respect to lowering their risk and threat? In a future episode of this, I want to dive into the specific attack types because they're really kind of fascinating, understanding the different types of attacks that are out there and what we can do to prevent them from occurring to us. There's maybe about 9 major types of threats that we should be familiar with and major type of attack vectors that are out there. And what are they and what are some of the things that we can use to protect ourselves? But that warrants its own episode, so we will definitely take a look at that in the future episode. So this is what we're hoping to do today. Ultimately, I'm trying to give you as many recommendations, thoughts, and tips that you can take to apply into your organization, both from the DBIR report as well as from my experience as well. And if you have any specific questions or comments, don't be afraid. Leave us a comment. Let us know if there's a particular threat type or actor or thing that you're interested or worried about for your organization, and we'd be happy to include that into a future podcast for yourself. Now, before we get rolling today, I do want to remind you that our class and podcast is eligible for CPE credit. Okay? You can earn CPE credit for just watching or listening to our podcast. It's super simple. At the end of our podcast today, head on over to cpetoday.com and you'll use course code PBI1. Take a short 5-question quiz and you will earn credit for today's class. Super simple, it's efficient, it's effective, and it's a great way of staying on top of your credits. If you like our content, if you like our classes, this is a great way to be able to support us. So please, if you're a financial professional, consider maybe getting some education with us. Besides our podcast, we have a whole wealth of other continuing education materials and a wide range of topics, including tax, audit, accounting, and more. And we're always adding new courses all the time. So check out CPE today for all of your continuing education needs. Okay, so first I want to kind of introduce what this DBIR report for you. So we're going to talk about where you can find it, where you can get a copy of it. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of these industry trends. We're going to take a look at some of the specific things that people in North America should be looking at and considering, especially things like industry patterns, regional patterns, classification, and more. Pretty much everything you need to know for the coming year and beyond to kind of keep yourself safe from data breaches. Now, I do want to remind you where you can get this report. Verizon, out of the goodness of their heart, make this report available annually for free. The time that in terms of its release kind of varies. It's usually in the beginning of summer or so. So this is a report that I'm on the lookout starting about mid-May and just looking and checking Verizon's site regularly and press releases to see where it's released. But I've been reading this report annually for many, many years. And in my opinion, it is the most comprehensive and the most insightful with respect to things I should be familiar with. Verizon started putting this together, I'm going to say almost 10 years ago, if not a little bit longer than that, and been distributing it for free since the inception. And you could download it. It comes in a couple of different versions. The big report's about 500 pages, includes tons of comprehensive knowledge that you could know with respect to your specific industries and specific attack types and other things that might be of useful and relevant to the way that you conduct your business. And then they also have executive summaries, which are pretty cool, that are by industry and by specific verticals and by specific attack types. So one of the things that you can choose to do is that you can get this in its executive summary format if you're not a big security nut like I am, and just know exactly what you need to know for your specific industry. And their website's also really comprehensive too, with really good, insightful information on facts and statistics relevant to the industry of your choosing. You can find it all for free on Verizon's website. It's verizon.com/DBIR. Now, as we start to roll into this, there's some specific terminology that you should be familiar with. Not only is this useful for understanding the report in context, but it's also really useful to kind of give you perspective on specific threats that might be unique to your specific industry. And it'll also help you when you're referencing the report to know what the heck they're talking about. So not everything is a breach. We have breaches and we have incidents, okay? So an incident is a confirmed attempt to get data, but the data may or may not have been shared. One of the things that we should be familiar with respect to data breaches is that we're always working with imperfect data. Often one of the first things that a threat actor will do is that they will delete your ability to be able to understand what the heck they did do. You know, essentially they're covering their tracks. So we have a lot more incidents than we do breaches. A breach is a confirmed attack where data has leaked outside of the web of trust of the company, and it is a type of incident. And so not every incident is a breach, but all breaches are incidents. And with respect to this, and this is just my conjecture, this is just my thoughts, that I'm going to go ahead and say that with respect to breaches, we maybe see maybe 10% of them. You know, I think there's a heck of a lot more breaches than we're familiar with, mostly just because of the wide discrepancy of reporting regulations, not only here in the United States, but abroad. But then also, there's no motivation for a company, for the most part, to want to disclose when that breach occurs. I mean, if you can get away with it without saying anything, you probably are going to. You know, if you say something, you're opening yourself up to regulation, you're opening yourself up to fine and other potential issues. But I think a lot of organizations will try to, let's just say, sweep it beneath the carpet, if you will, and kind of hold it private. Now, what I will say is that this is changing. With respect to data breaches, we have a number of regulations here in the United States. For example, the CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, as well as similar regulations that have occurred in states like Virginia and Florida, where mandatory disclosure of data breaches is becoming compulsory. We have to do this. outside the United States, we have, for example, GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, which require and mandate an organization to, tell you when essentially data breaches have occurred inside their organization. So I wouldn't be surprised that the number of reported breaches will go up in the coming years, but I don't think it's any more than what we've seen in prior years in the sense of, I think it's always been there. It's just now companies are facing some real big regulatory hurdles if they don't report them. Now, you've heard me use the term threat actor, and a threat actor is a very inclusive term that really kind of talks about anybody that's involved in a data breach. A threat actor can be anybody acting maliciously against the company. They could be an external person, like a hacker halfway around the world, or it could be an internal person, an employee with a grudge or an axe to grind that's looking to steal data for some particular purpose. Threat actors can also be a combination of both. They could be internal and external people. And often with very large data breaches, that's what we see. The action is what and how that breach was accomplished. So it could be through malware, it could be through phishing. We will expose and talk about some of the different actions in a future podcast. We have the pattern, which are the characteristics. Is it affecting, for example, financial data? Is it affecting personal data? What are the characteristics of that specific breach that we should know about? Okay, the attribute. What is the actor trying to steal, and what's essentially their motivation? So it could be money, it could be personal identifiable information for identity theft, and more. And we have the assets, which are the actual specific things stolen. In the event of, let's say, for example, a data breach, it might be compromising a point of sale system to steal money, or it could be, for example, the compromise of a professional service firm with the intention of being able to steal PII, personally identifiable information. Now, it's important because as you read through these reports, these terms have specific meanings that can really kind of help you put them into context for the report, and you know what they're talking about. Now, for the people that are committing these data breaches, it's important to know their motivations. And there's about 6 major ones that we should be familiar with. And it should come to no surprise with respect to the primary motivation of these actors. It is financial gain. I mean, no risk, no reward. And for these people, they are often compromising systems and stealing data for some sort of financial gain. And that financial gain can vary widely. It could be, for example, stealing direct credit card numbers and committing fraudulent charges, to stealing PII and then opening up lines of credit or taking out loans for other people. It could also be indirect too, where maybe it's not them directly using this information, but rather an additional third party that they are maybe working in conjunction with. And often you should be aware that the people who are stealing the data, especially in large-scale data breaches, might have multiple motives, and they might also be working with multiple people. So it's kind of always hard to nail down the exact reason. But number one by far is going to be some sort of financial gain. And this is especially true for organized crime, third-party hacker rings and organizations based outside the United States that are primarily, for example, doing the phishing scams and the robocalls and stuff like that. Ultimately, they're trying to rip you off and get money. If we look bigger, if we go beyond the actual scope of organized crime, if we look at larger instances of this, nation state, which increasingly is becoming more common, often it's some sort of espionage. And so that espionage, especially when we look at the really big stuff, could be coming and originating from places like North Korea, China, Russia, and more, where it's not even just a ring of criminals, but an actual country behind it and the intelligence agencies inside of that country. A good example of this would be the recent SolarWinds data breach, which is on par with Equifax in terms of size and scope of what was stolen and the risk and compromise that was a result of that. The SolarWinds data breach absolutely had to have been accomplished by a nation state to have the resources to be able to infiltrate that company and to cause that kind of hack. That breach, if you're not familiar with it, resulted in malware being distributed in the SolarWinds software that ultimately got distributed to practically the entire Fortune 500, the Department of Defense, and many other critical organizations. And it was a result of espionage. It was a result of people being able to infiltrate that company and ultimately trying to steal information. So, and if it's, for example, a business type espionage, it could be, for example, taking data to get some sort of edge on a competitor. If it is governmental espionage, it could be much, much more broad than that. And it could be something that's not just for today, but in the future as well. We see a fair amount that is a result of grudge, especially in organizations. Actors attempting to enact revenge for a perceived wrong. They'll take data, sometimes just make it publicly available, sometimes sell it to a competitor, but the money is an afterthought. It's just something, that they're not happy with. On more, let's just say, student-oriented, kid-oriented, high schooler type stuff, it could be just to see what they could do. Frankly, I think at some point in my life, I think I was probably one of those guys, just kind of seeing where and how technology worked and how I could compromise. Some people do things just to see if they can do it. They don't really necessarily have malice in their heart, but they're just doing it for fun. They're just trying to see what kind of buttons they can push and levers they can pull. Now we see crimes that are acts of convenience. Actors might have a different goal in mind with originally hacking a data system, but it might take more work than available. So they maybe, for example, just steal the user credentials rather than going after, the whole kit and caboodle, like the medical records. So it's kind of a way of settling. Often when we look at an organization, there's lots of different categories and lots of different buckets of content that can be stolen. Besides, let's just say that the gold and the vault, there could be all these other lower hanging fruits that also add value. We can also see attacks around ideology. The group that immediately comes to mind is the Anonymous group. Anonymous is a worldwide network of disinterested, ethical, well, not really ethical, but hackers that essentially that hack or manipulate or break an organization based off of their specific beliefs. We've seen this, for example, in law enforcement. We've seen this in religious institutions where the hacktivist group doesn't necessarily agree philosophically with that organization, and so they're a target. Essentially they're going to try to compromise the systems to steal privileged information, and then usually to make it public or to cause embarrassment of some sort. We also see a number of secondary, where the ultimate goal is to leverage finance, but at the same time, if they can harm you along the way, they're going to go ahead and do that. The takeaway from this, with respect to the motivations, there is varied as the attack types and as varied as the organizations that are subject to this. In your organization, I would tell you, you should think about the most critical part of your data. If you're a healthcare, it's going to be your patient medical data. If you're a CPA firm, it's going to be your client tax returns or other confidential information. That's what they're looking to steal. Somebody is willing to pay for it, or it can be leveraged in some way to either make money, to embarrass your company, cause a competitive edge to be lost, or to cause otherwise harm to your organization. Now, the way these motivations take out and the way that they take place vary depending on the nature of the organization. And there's different incident classifications, and there are different incident threats depending on the nature of your company. Different companies have different risks depending on what they do. For example, if you are a retail organization and you have a point of sale system, guess what? You're specifically susceptible to, let's say, system intrusion much more than another organization that doesn't have point of sale. Point of sale systems are going to be what they're going off and what they're focusing on. If you're a professional service firm, and you're dealing with personally identifiable information, tax returns and things like this, you're much more susceptible to something like, social engineering, where they're going to try to manipulate you to willingly hand over your data. So we're going to expose and walk through the different attack types in the future episodes in this DBIR series, but here are the major ones that we should be familiar with. And you can start to think about how these would apply to your organization. And as we walk through a couple of the major industry classification types, I'll point out ones and how they work. But they are, for example, social engineering, what we call web application attacks, sometimes referred to as a SQL injection or a credential compromise account. It could be also another type of attack type called a credential stuffing attack. But basically, it's data on the web and applications on the web that are publicly facing that are susceptible. That's what happened, for example, in Equifax case. We have system intrusion, which is really kind of around breaking a company firewall and going after a company's internal systems. We have errors, which can be huge. There have been a number of data breaches over the years that have not been malicious per se, but just somebody fat-fingered something and made a mistake. Okay, we have privilege misuse. This is where people don't really hack anything. They're authorized to have access to that data and then, abuse their fiduciary obligations and duties to the company and either take data, delete data, modify data. Edward Snowden from the NSA, who caused a very large data breach to occur in the NSA, as well as exposing secret government programs for surveillance here in the United States, didn't break, hack, steal anything. I mean, he had access to that data. He just abused his privilege. I'm not here to speak to the efficacy or the criminal nature of what he did. I'm just pointing out purely it was an abuse of his privilege inside that company. Number of breaches have occurred due to stolen and lost assets. Tons of computers and phones and tablets every year go missing in hotels and airports around the country that can result in serious risk to the organization. We have denial of service, which is often used as a smokescreen to other major types of data breaches around the world, and can cause serious harm to organizations that have any measure of web presence, completely knock you offline. And if you're an e-commerce company or a company that has a client portal or something like that, it could be a huge interruption to you, because the traffic that will be sent to your web application or to your web service is so overwhelming that normal customers can't even do business with you. And it's an increasingly common attack that's used in conjunction with other attacks to often be as a smokescreen to a larger, theft of financial information or theft of privileged medical information or insurance information for a company. And then there's just really kind of frankly everything else where it doesn't kind of fit into a pattern, but it kind of fits into some sort of loss to a company. So we're going to dive into how each of these occur in a future podcast, but I just wanted to mostly make you aware of some of the major classification patterns that are out there. All right, folks, let's go ahead and have our first review question for the podcast. Okay, so what is the main reason actors steal data? Is it fun? Nope. I think that's probably the lowest of these particular categories. I think it is certainly some of these particular instances, but it's definitely not the main one. It's a convenience. No, I think that's when people settle and, they're going after something else, but, this is just an easier approach. Is it espionage? I think that's probably number 2, if I were to guess, especially as we start to see some of the increase with respect to the nation states that are involved here and the intricacies and the capabilities that a specific attack would require in order to be pulled off. In my opinion, and in the opinion of the DBIR report, the correct answer here would be money. Money is something that we all can come back to, and the reason these organizations risk in the way that they do and risk not only something like civil penalties, but certainly criminal action would be kind of around making money. Why would you do it otherwise? In our next section here, let's go ahead and look at some of the overall trends inside of North America. So most of us are based here in North America. There are specific trends that affect Western businesses that don't affect, for example, businesses based in Asia or Europe or other places. And North America continues to be a target for financially motivated criminal actions. Why? Because there's a lot of money to be made here, and there's a lot of businesses that are here. The same cannot be said to parts of Asia, as well as parts of Eastern Europe in specific, and parts of Africa. Here, there are a lot of specifics that we should be familiar with, and a lot of specific businesses and people that are impacted by this that can certainly be a easy target for criminals that are looking to get more financial success out of this. So in this particular section, this report looked at probably about 13,200 different incidents. They had about 1,000 confirmed data breaches, and some of the main patterns that kind of evolved from this were around social engineering, system intrusion, web applications being compromised. These three specific patterns represented about 92% of breaches overall. Additionally, we saw an increase in the number of external threat actors in terms of people outside our company, representing about 82% overall. With financial motivation being the biggest aspect of this, and ultimately with credential, personal information, and other components being stolen. So let's go ahead and dive into this. And if we look at, kind of our overall kind of major patterns, okay, social engineering continues to dominate the landscape. Social engineering, in a nutshell, is when a person or people manipulate a person into willingly handing over, their personal information or their credentials or organizational information. It can happen through a number of different methods. There are really sophisticated ones like spear phishing, where you are specifically targeted inside of your organization due to your position of authority and fiduciary obligation. And there's kind of the low value stuff that I think most of us, for example, deal with on a regular basis. I can't tell you the number of times that I get emails, from people, saying that I need to reset my Facebook password, or I need to log into my bank to update my password, and it's not coming from Citibank, and it's not coming from Facebook or Amazon or other things like that. Ultimately, they're trying to commit fraud. They're trying to manipulate me into willingly handing over this information. We need to be very vigilant inside of our companies in order to kind of protect ourselves for this. Phishing continues to be in topping the charts with respect to one of the main ways that organizations get compromised, and that's just a form of social engineering. A really good method that for your organization to kind of help lower your overall risk and attack profile is to do preventative testing with respect to teaching your staff about social engineering and about phishing. How to answer the phone, how to not willingly hand over information that could be otherwise used to cause a breach, or not clicking on emails that frankly shouldn't be clicked upon, or not clicking on links inside of a website that are clearly malicious. So this continues to be a major trend, and I don't see this changing anytime soon. For a lot of these organizations, they are a numbers game, where, they know they have to call 1,000 people before they get that one person that says yes and falls to their scam, or they have to send out 10 million emails to get one person to click on that particular link that can cause a data breach. Or, to masquerade, for example, as an IT department and calling up organizations and saying, hey, I'm here to fix your computer. Can you hand over your username and password? Unfortunately, this is going to continue to be the issue. And I've seen it play out many different ways. I've seen the phone calls, for example. I've seen the emails. And it's only through education and being vigilant that we can really kind of identify those particular risks. And I think training your people can be really effective. There's a really cool company called KnowBe4 that you can Google, and they do training on this that's really useful in terms of helping your staff identify potential issues. We're seeing often system intrusion. With system intrusion, we're seeing applications inside the organization being compromised. It could be something as simple as not securing your remote desktop server. It could be like, for example, allowing unauthorized, unauthenticated access to your server by anybody on the web. You're not utilizing, for example, something like a VPN. And, these people essentially are able to crawl the internet, find these servers that have low security, and are able to compromise them. If I were to say one of the biggest risks that an organization faces overall would be around not keeping their systems up to date and patched. If I were to give you one recommendation with respect to improving your overall security inside your company, it's to update your systems. I will take an updated system probably over any other security method and over any other security best practice. Because if we look at malware, like ransomware as an example, it almost exclusively targets out-of-date older systems. You keep your systems up to date, more than anything, you're going to be okay. The second best practice would be to utilize good password management techniques, preferably using a password management tool, as well as utilizing two-factor authentication. But you do those three things: two-factor authentication, good passwords, keep your systems up to date. You know what? you're going to be safe and secure overall. There's plenty of other specific, more focused attacks, but again, if we think about the threat actors, it's a numbers game for these folks. They're focusing on trying to hit the largest number of people with the least amount of effort. Just don't be that low-hanging fruit. Okay, so we see the system intrusion, we see basic web applications. What I will say with respect to basic application attacks, it really kind of falls around for organizations that are making software. You need to employ best practices like limiting the number of password attempts, sanitizing user inputs when they're, for example, filling out a form. A lot of these basic web applications, again, can be mitigated by just keeping your system up to date. But if we look at these three patterns, just these three alone, these represent substantially all the specific threats that we have here in North America. Other ones, like our errors, our privilege misuse, yes, those are still going to be problems, but frankly, they're going to be problems no matter what in terms of the specific being here to North America. And they're really kind of hard to minimize. I can't, for example, force somebody to be ethical. And I can encourage my staff to be diligent and to reduce errors, but frankly, no matter what, it's going to continue to occur. Now, if we look at specific outcomes of this, in terms of the specific varieties of data that are taken, and if we look at some of the outcomes that can occur from this, most of the time what we're looking at is we're looking at the theft of credentials with about representing 60 amount of time. With those credentials, they could be used, for example, in a credential stuffing attack. A credential stuffing attack is where I steal data from a system, okay, and then I turn around and I see if those credentials happen to work on another system. Intuit, for example, fell victim to this not too long ago. Intuit themselves did not have a data breach, but what they are guilty of is allowing their users to make bad security decisions. And often employees will use the same username and passwords repeatedly for years on end across many different sites. Well, if your credentials get stolen, well, they can turn around and see if they work, for example, on the Bank of America's website or your payroll processor or Office 365 or more, barring some sort of additional security method like two-factor authentication. Well, that can cause particular issues where those credentials are compromised and then allow access to that other system, even though that system itself was not breached. Other major issues here would be the theft of personnel information, internal information, medical information, and others. Okay. Now, if we look at this with respect to timeline, and these are two of the ones that I really find interesting. We have our discovery timeline, and then we have our for breaches as well as for incidents here. And if we look at this, and with respect to, let's come down here to the bottom first and take a look at this. Very few breaches are discovered within seconds, minutes, or hours. And what this really kind of speaks to is the fact that most organizations don't have what we would consider intrusion detection, where if somebody is able to compromise the external layer of security, like the firewall at the edge of the network, once they're kind of in, they're in. If we look at this, a substantial number of these breaches go on for at least days, about 40% in both of those particular instances. Okay, and a fair number, about 20%, go on for weeks and or months. Some of the largest data breaches, I'm thinking, for example, of Yahoo, is the first one that comes to mind here, went on for years without people actually knowing. If we look at one of the most publicly known data breaches, which is the Equifax data breach, which is a result of a system not being updated in Equifax, well, between the time that it was discovered and it was, essentially dealt with, between the time that the breach occurred and it being discovered, it was almost 90 days, if it wasn't a day short of that. And that's pretty common for these breaches. Once they're in, it can be very, very difficult to be able to resolve this or even uncover when that particular issue occurred and when it started. And it's a race, for example, to be able to kind of cobble together forensic evidence to figure out the extent to which that damage occurred inside that company. The takeaway from this is you don't want to let this be you, okay? Most of us have a very soft interior. So if we have a soft interior, we need to have a hard exterior. We need to ensure that we have good security on the edge, on the peripheral, where private meets external, to ensure that as much preventative work that can be done is done. Because if a data breach can occur, it can often go on for a lot longer. It's also important to point out that with respect to these data breaches, when they do occur, it's not like when you discover it, you can just cut off access immediately. Depending on the nature of that breach, it can be very difficult to resolve, in the sense that, if it's a web application that is customer facing, like let's say online banking, you just can't terminate access. That could really affect your customers in a very negative way. Even if it's detrimental to the client, they still would maintain access if it's for example, a line of business application. Imagine it's your financial package like QuickBooks Online, or if it's your ERP solution that's managing your warehouse. You just can't turn those things off without causing major other issues to the company. So don't let it be you. Now, if we look at this year's report in comparison to prior year reports, we can start to see some trends with respect to different incidents that have occurred over time. Okay, some particular type of attack types have become less popular. Some have become more popular with respect to where we have started. A good example of this that's kind of come in and out of fashion, and I think if anything it's going to go up, would be denial of service. And denial of service is often used in conjunction with other type of attack types. It's a good smokescreen to distract people while a more damaging data breach is occurring. Okay, we're seeing other things starting to trend upwards, like the basic web applications and compromising software for a company. Okay, we're seeing increases in social engineering. I think this is going to explode over the next couple of years. Okay, and other things like errors, those are relatively flat. I mean, errors occur. I don't think we're going to be able to eliminate this risk forever, but I will also say at the same time that some software is getting better at like data validation, error checking, to help reduce this as a risk to our companies. Okay. Now, other things like privilege misuse, thankfully, have taken a nosedive. Why? Because there are so many really good applications out there, like data loss prevention, which is a technique, for example, to be able to examine data as it moves through a network as well as at rest, to find out where potential issues could arise and people stealing data. So we've become a lot better, for example, at designing software that can prevent somebody from being able to minimize their, or at least for the organization wide, for being able to minimize where people abuse their status and steal information. It's not going to go away forever, especially if you're at a high level inside the organization, like at a director or higher. Often, a lot of these safeguards are designed for people below you in the food chain. And, it's really kind of hard anytime when you're in a high level position to eliminate that risk completely. But I will say that forensic gathering has gotten better. Audit logging has gotten better. We have tools and techniques that can track this information. And I think people know that. Often in most of these applications, there are features that are there that either just need to be looked at or maybe even just turned on for you to be able to use. Things like audit logs, where every user action's being logged. When they logged in, when they logged out, what they clicked on, what they did, what they didn't do. If you're being watched, you're probably not going to use your privileges to steal data for other purposes. Now, who are committing and why are these attacks occurring? Well, if we look at the big side of this, overwhelmingly, it's going to be organized crime. If I think of the scammers overseas, for example, why are they doing this? They're doing this to not only, they're doing it to make money at the end of the day. So I would say organized crime, their primary motivation is going to be financial. These scammers overseas make tons of money. They have a whole industry around scamming and stealing data from people in the West. It's also important to know that not every country considers this to be a crime. There are many parts of this world where a data breach for a company on the other side of the planet isn't necessarily a crime or something that will be prosecuted. And there's also many countries that just frankly don't respect intellectual property. So compromising a company here in the United States, while is a huge deal here in the context of fraud and the context of just having information potentially stolen for identity theft, frankly, isn't an issue in other places. I'm looking at you, China. I'm looking at you, Russia. If you did that to an internal company in either of those countries, yeah, it's going to be a big deal, but you're going to get little to no motivation from them to want to prosecute their internal citizens for crimes committed in the United States. The borders of the United States are physical. Our laws do not apply outside the United States in many of these other countries. Western Europe's obviously an exception. There's plenty of good intellectual property protection in those parts of the world, but we start going to some other places around the country where they frankly have bigger fish to fry and more important things to deal with, you're going to get little to no traction. Okay, and that's why these companies and these scammers exist in places like Russia and China and throughout the other parts of the world, because they can essentially operate with impunity. Okay, so organized crime, biggest motivation there is going to be on the financial side of this. And we're starting to see, although this graph doesn't really, in my opinion, do a really good job of it in terms of if we show the relative impact of some of these data breaches, we're also starting to see a rise in state affiliated. If we look at the really biggest of big data breaches that have occurred, almost all of them in some material way are using nation states and are affiliated with specific countries that are behind it. And this means the government agencies, it means the military, the intelligence communities in those places are often the ones that are doing it. So how are these attacks occurring? They're occurring through techniques such as denial of service, phishing through social media networks and on the web. Ransomware continues to be incredibly pervasive. This is when your computer gets compromised with some sort of malware that encrypts the data on that particular drive and then forces the user to either pay a prescribed fee to get their data back or lose their data completely. Any of those are major actions that were occurring. And so we just need to be unaware of where these are occurring to help identify, to hopefully change behavior and hopefully be able to be in a position to prevent this from occurring to our own organizations. Now, what was attacked and what was compromised? What should we be familiar with in terms of devices and people? Well, in almost all circumstances, we're specifically looking at where data resides. And where does data reside? It's almost always on a server of some sort. Server is a computer that manages data for multiple people. So, most of the time, that's what we're trying to compromise. Okay. Other types would be compromising the person. If you start kind of doing a lot of security research, you'll find that in almost all circumstances, major data breaches involve compromise of a person. It's easier to hack the person than it is to hack the server. An up-to-date version of Windows 10, an up-to-date version of Windows Server is far more secure than your staff. Your staff is susceptible to specific risks and manipulation and poor security practices. You might take this very seriously, but does every member of your company take it seriously? From the intern to the CEO? Probably not. And if we look at some of the biggest, largest security breaches that have occurred, they're usually happenstance. There's a fair amount of luck that's involved in it, and it almost always involves a breakdown of an individual that didn't take security practices as seriously as they should have. But securing our servers, and that means, for example, having good edge security, like having VPNs, having firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, can go a long way to help keep our organizations safe and secure. Now, if we look at some of the major terms that have kind of been used, some of the major types of data that are being exchanged across these criminal enterprises, we do kind of see some change over time. So what this graph kind of shows us on one axis is percentage of the attack types, and then on the bottom axis we see over time. So for example, if we look at some of the major information that's being compromised here, bank information continues to be very important. Username, passwords to banking services. I think it's probably declining because, at least here in the United States, there's mandatory security regulation that's put forth by, for example, the FDIC and the banking regulatory authorities. That's making this information, like a username and password to your Bank of America account, less useful or relevant because thankfully they require things like two-factor authentication now. Okay. Other important data would be, for example, credit card information, phone information, banking information, personal information, and more that ultimately can be used for other aspects of identity theft. Let's go ahead and have another review question. What is the number one way that data will be breached? Is it phishing with an F? No, but that would be sure a lot of fun if you could have a poll and you could literally fish for that data. Is it stolen credentials? That's certainly a component of it. Is it ransomware? No, it is not. Okay, the number one way that we see data being breached substantially is through social engineering, which is almost always phishing. Email is often, for most organizations, their number one attack vector. Not always, but substantially, especially in North America, and especially for knowledge-based, service-based organizations. I would tell you, be very, very wary of social engineering and be very, very wary of email. Don't open email from people you don't know. Don't click on links from people you don't know. And certainly do not download and open attachments. Applications, for example, like Excel, a macro-enabled Excel workbook, absolutely can have malware inside of it. A PDF, can absolutely have malware inside of it. However, if you have an up-to-date computer running the latest version of Windows 10, the up-to-date version of Acrobat with the latest security patches from Adobe, and the most up-to-date version of Office, preferably running Office 365. I'm not going to say you're going to eliminate your risk, but you're going to get a lot closer compared to most organizations. Okay, in our next section, let's go ahead and take a look at some specific organizations and industries. I'm going to take a look at probably 2 or 3 of these. We'll take a look at, for example, small and medium sized businesses overall across all specific verticals. And we'll take a look at the finance industry. And depending on how much time we have, we might look at 1 or 2 other ones. I will point out that all of these and more with several different industry types are covered in depth in that Verizon DBIR report. And you, for example, can go and find your specific industry or industries that are very similar to what your business does. And you can learn, for example, the specific things that you should be aware of for your company. Okay, so some macro level trends that we should be familiar with. Okay, the gap between incidents and breaches has becoming less pronounced. The data, for example, is becoming more similar between the two of them. Really, it's hard to kind of tell a confirmed breach from just having an incident. And a lot of organizations will have incidents, but it's kind of actually hard to be able to determine an exact breach. The top patterns are starting to align regardless of organization size, from small and medium-sized business. The threats used to be very pronounced if you were a Fortune 50, Fortune 500 compared to a mom and pop shop, but the top patterns are starting to become more aligned. Fewer internal actors are doing naughty things. I like that. That is a very good thing. Why? We can trust our people. And so that's a good thing, knowing that at least internally, we're putting enough internal controls in place to reduce our risk for our staff. Okay. Lots of crimes are still being financially motivated, typically by organized crime. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. If anything, it's going to become more pervasive. I will tell you, again, the laws of the United States start and stop at our borders. So we want to ensure that we have as many proactive security protocols in place, because that's often our first and, in many instances, our only line of defense. Common patterns for web applications continue to increase. More and more organizations are building their own software, which is a really good thing because it helps provide efficiency and effectiveness inside of our companies above and beyond what kind of off-the-shelf software can do. But we need to do it from a security-first perspective. Large organizations have made the shift to finding breaches within days or less over half the cases, while smaller organizations are not doing as well. The takeaway from this is big business has more resources, they have more capabilities, and they're going to be able to have the ability to detect when this type of crime occurs and be able to deal with it in a much more proactive manner. Let me just ask you a question and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. If a data breach were to occur inside your organization, how would you know? For most people, they wouldn't. They're relying on IT staff or their IT departments to tell them a particular breach occurs, if they're lucky enough, for example, to have that particular staff. And if they don't have that staff, well, frankly, they're waiting until something wrong happens and then they deal with it. It's kind of like, for example, knowing something about cars and proactively changing your brakes before you hear them squeak. One, if you know about it, you know to check it, and you can deal with it before it becomes a problem. The other one, by the time you're hearing it squeak, they should have been changed already. Let's take a deep dive on small and medium businesses specifically. I love small business. I'm a small business owner myself. Always worked in small business, and small business is the backbone of America. If small business is doing well, everybody's doing well. Okay? Well, looking at this specific type of industry, if we look at this, some of the major patterns that appear would be things like system intrusion, errors, and web applications being compromised. These three major areas represent about 80% of breaches overall. If we look at the people perpetrating this, we could see that about 56% of the time they're external, with internal representing about 44%. Okay, the takeaway from that, just kind of thinking about it, I think bigger businesses, for example, are going to have better internal systems that have better security inside of those systems compared to small business. If I think of, for example, an application we probably all have some familiarity with, QuickBooks. Okay, so you got QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks and then you also have like QuickBooks Enterprise. Both are good applications in their own right. Okay, but QuickBooks Online is a much more consumer SMB type product. QuickBooks Enterprise actually still pretty much an SMB product. It is not really an enterprise solution compared to like a Dynamics 365 or compared to an Epicor or an Open Systems or something like that. But just using those as an example here, QBO, you create the user, you have very limited access with respect to defining what those users' privileges are. For the most part, it's all you can eat, meaning you create the account and they can do whatever they want. Well, if we look at QuickBooks Enterprise, it's role-based authentication. It's role-based security privileges. I create not necessarily the user, but I create the role. And that role, for example, should be like accounts payable clerk or accounts receivable clerk. And I assign discrete permissions to the role and then assign the user to the role. It ensures that my privileges are unique to that particular occupation and also uniformly applied across all those people who have the role. Well, your SMB product, your small product's not going to have that. It's just kind of one by one, which is a very weak way of designing security versus your more enterprise premium product will. So that's kind of my takeaway, is that with the small, medium businesses, they generally, it's not that the security software is bad, it's just much more limited compared to what you would get with a more premium product. What are our motivations here? Well, hands down, they're always financial, okay? With representing about 93% of the motivation. If we look at this, they're stealing credentials, they're stealing personal information, client data, in most of these instances. And if we look at the median timeline for discovery, okay, if we look at side of this, often it's longer than we would want, with days, weeks, and months being the most common occurrences for discovering of that particular breach. Okay. Now, if we look at larger organizations, okay, so we've gone out of the small business and we go to our more larger organizations with more than 1,000 employees. Okay, we see similar types of issues: system intrusion, miscellaneous errors, web applications, representing about 74% of breaches. Okay, we see also internal and external people. Okay, the motivation is about the same, in terms of why these people are compromising their systems. But the big difference is we see a far larger percentage of these breaches being discovered internally quicker than we do in small and medium-sized organizations. We see a lot more of these breaches occurring and being discovered within days than we do, for example, in small and medium business, where it might be weeks and months. Now, using the finance industry as an example here, okay, what's kind of cool about this report is it dives into, in future podcasts, we'll dive into specific industries to kind of give you some knowledge unique to the one industries that represent your organization. But if we look at the finance industry, okay, almost half of all the breaches in this vertical were caused by internal actors committing various types of errors, For example, missed delivery, sending emails to wrong people. The financial sector frequently faces credential and ransomware attacks from external folks, so errors still plague even finance industries as well as our applications and social engineering. We can see, for example, about 56% of these people and these breaches are occurring from organizations outside of the company, with financial being the main motivating factor behind it. What are they stealing? They're stealing personal information, they're stealing credentials, and a lot of other stuff like that as well that can ultimately be used for identity theft, credential stuffing, and other stuff like this. And if we see, even going back to the 2006 report to today, external actors for people who are compromising or trying to cause compromise in the financial industry are almost always external. But we can also see kind of they're coming together, and eventually we might see, for example, more internal people compromising. Hopefully not. Let's go ahead and do one more, and then we'll wrap up with our final review question. So for the information industry, okay, well, this particular industry is struggling with botnets that essentially are stealing data. Errors are also pretty common with misconfiguration, essentially not having the right system settings with the right configuration for the operating system or the network, leaving ports exposed, for example, for data to be compromised and for those servers to be able to be compromised. Okay, web application attacks continue to be a major issue, as well as errors and system intrusion. Our threat actors are about 66% of the time external, about 37% of the time internal. What are their main motivation? It's financial, and they're trying to take data and credentials and other things that can be used for identity theft purposes. But for the information industry, okay, so people dealing with, systems for that matter, what are they trying to go for? I mean, they're trying to steal data that can be used for other data breaches, identity theft, and other really nasty stuff. And a fair amount of the time, 80% of the time, a lot of these issues can be dealt with by having the right configuration for your network and for your computer. And a big piece of this is having basic security applications like firewalls, good routers, and then keeping those devices up to date with the latest firmware. Remember, your server, your router, your switch, your wireless access point, it runs software too. It needs to be up to date, and have the right security permissions and have the right configuration side of it, as well as your actual computer and your cell phone. Just configuring your devices correctly can make a huge benefit in reducing your overall risk and exposure for this particular industry. Now, other ones I've got listed here would be our professional industry. And in this particular instance, dealing with normal professionals, the particular risks are very similar to what we would see for the finance and information industry. In system intrusion prevention, social engineering continue to be very difficult and major issues for these industries to overcome. Most of these crimes are financially motivated. Some can be espionage, but we're looking at 97% versus 2%. I mean, if you're a professional, they're trying to steal your client data at the end of the day, okay? And if we look at this in terms of the main varieties, it's exactly what we think it's going to be. It's going to be phishing. It's going to be social engineering. Okay, and so by educating ourselves and understanding where our particular risks are, we can help reduce our overall organizational risk and exposure. In training our staff, ensuring our weakest link is stronger than ever before is probably one of the best investments we can make in improving the overall security for our companies. Okay, folks, let's go ahead and have our final review question. What breach patterns do both large and small SMB clients have in common? Okay, so what would be unique from one to the other? Well, is a system intrusion? Yeah, that's common to both companies. Everybody is susceptible to having their systems compromised. Is it errors? You betcha. Okay, all organizations, even the most diligent of workers, will make errors at one point. It's important to have the right techniques and processes in place to help reduce what those particular errors cause and the damage that can be inflicted. Is it having basic web applications compromised? Yes. All applications, doesn't matter who makes them, are going to be susceptible to being breached. We have to keep them up to date in order to reduce our risk. So the correct answer here is all of the above. Alrighty, well, in today's class, we introduced the Verizon DBIR report. We talked about how this report is used to help organizations identify the risks by their particular industry and to make better security decisions for their companies. Okay, we talked about some of the overall data trend statistics for North America, as well as took a look at small and large businesses and some of the differences and similarities between them, as well as looking at a specific couple of industries. Okay, I would encourage you, download a copy of this free report from Verizon, check it out for yourself, and you can find specific risks for whatever vertical that you happen to be in. As well as the report will identify, and we'll go through in future podcasts as well, best practices for security industry by industry. In the next podcast of this series, we're going to talk about the specific breaches that occur, like denial of service, what it means to compromise a web application, what it means to do social engineering, to educate you on how these attack types occur so that you can identify it when it's happening to your company. So stay tuned. Lots more great information in this series. Now, that does bring us to the end of our podcast. And before we go, I do want to remind you, you can earn CPE credit for listening and watching today's podcast. It's super simple, okay? So after watching and listening, head on over to cpetoday.com. Use course code IDT3. Again, that is IDT3. Take a short 5-question quiz and you'll earn a credit for today's class, and you'll be well on your way for maintaining your professional licensing. Besides this, again, we've got courses on everything: audit, accounting, tax, lots of stuff written by incredible authors all over the world. If you enjoyed our presentation for today, please consider following us on social media. You can find us on almost all social media channels at CPE Today. You're welcome to subscribe and get our updates when we're releasing new podcasts and new shows. We'd love nothing more than for you to leave a comment so that we can know what you like and what type of content that you would like on your own and what you would like to see us have included in future broadcasts. As a reminder, we do put this podcast out live most weeks, twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays at 11 Pacific. You can ask questions, you can get involved, and if you can't watch live, not a problem. We're also available on the podcast platform of your choosing, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and more. So please consider subscribing so that you can get your up-to-date and relevant accounting, business, technology information to help you be the best financial professional you possibly can. It's my absolute and sincere pleasure being with you here today. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you back in the office the next time around.